Well, first of all, as the first speaker, or the first person to talk at this stage, I think thank all the speakers for a day which I think has gone right round the hinterland of the issue we're discussing. So I think it's been a very, very useful day indeed. I really just want to make a comment, I think, on Calum's presentation about, because I think if we really stand back and take the broad view, there can be little doubt that technology is, over the next 20 or 30 years, going to lift the human race, if it's sensible, to a situation where there is enough for all, where we shouldn't have 1 in 5 people short of food or anything like that. And as people have said, the difficulty is, how do we get to that situation without panic from, you know, the limited mindsets that we've got now? And Calum said that he doesn't think UBI is the answer. But one thing nobody's mentioned is we seem to focus very much on the figures and the numbers and affordability, as if that itself seems to me to be a block, because money itself, pound notes, don't have any value. They're just the way we exchange activities and skills between each other. And it seems to me we've got locked into this idea that ridiculous amounts of money have to be paid to a small number of people to get anything done. And I don't think that's the way most people in this room think, certainly not the way I think. As a member of the sort of financially secure senior citizens club, I'm not quite sure what financially secure means in this day and age, and the senior citizen bit's not so good because your exit is getting ever closer, and there's only one way out, unfortunately. You know, once I had enough, I had enough of, you know, minies. I'm much more interested in doing constructive and interesting things and thinking, how can I get more money? Oh, somebody else has got more. And I think it's a sort of a mindset that somehow we've grown into. And I think I'd like to hear the economists who are still there saying, if we reduce the difference between the highest paid and the lowest paid, that would of itself redistribute wealth. I think, you know, we've got to actually get to the situation where we've got this wealth, so we need incentives. But I don't think, but I think it doesn't mean that the person who's good at organizing or developing things shouldn't have a higher wage, but or shouldn't even control vast resources. But it should be a more equitable system in that way would mean that the results would be spread more widely, and therefore you could be able to have higher basic incomes at the lower level anyway. So I think that's one route by which we could start thinking about this now, and that would enable the route towards the abundance economy that we're getting. So I'll stop there because I can see David wants the microphone, and it's a comment more than the question, but I think there are ways to break the mindset and get to this abundant future for all.
Thanks. And Joanna, you said you had a question, so you can question and then we'll discuss that point, because there's quite a lot in Tony's point.
Yeah, well, actually, I guess to some extent, Tony actually gave an answer to my question, but I was going to direct it to you because I was going to say sort of the same thing. But so I actually massively agree with what Calum was saying about quite a lot of that stuff. And in particular, I think we are already, and this is, when you project, when you think AI is this big exceptional event and singularity is something in the future and it's going to come and it's going to take over and make us into horses or something, you neglect the fact that we've been changing our society with AI for decades now. And I would say that, as we've said this morning, there are already, the people are voluntarily either taking full unemployment or partial unemployment, or just taking lower paying jobs when they're doing it voluntarily, not because they can't find anything else. Then that's already people saying, hey, we've got enough abundance for me. And actually, inequality globally is dropping. In the OECD, it's increasing, and that's really dangerous because some people have more power than nations. But globally, a lot of people are a lot better off. And so I think we need to embrace the fact that we're already moving into the future. And so my question was to you, why you thought there was a sharp threshold that was coming up when a lot of your vision, which again, I agree with your vision, I feel like we're already experiencing and haven't quite recognized.
Well, I think it's possible that the pace of change which we're seeing and is increasing and is frightening may suddenly go through a phase transition. A bit like when, in smaller scale, we saw that with AlphaGo 0 turning into alpha 0, and suddenly being able to do many more things much more quickly than people had expected would be possible, in which just a few hours of training, using the vast resources of Google, but a few hours of training meant that this software was now better than all the chess programs which humans had worked on for decades and decades. So there's an example of suddenly progress which hadn't been expected to happen anything like so quickly caught people out. Even Eliezer Yudkowsky, who I quoted, he apparently did not think that AlphaGo would manage to beat the Go player.
Some of the stuff that feels exceptional isn't that exceptional. So a lot of us who do Twitter know Miles Brundage. He's done a beautiful graph, and actually Ed Felton is now showing this graph too without credit, but of showing that, you know, for chess and for Go and all these things, it was absolutely linear. It was not one of those logarithmic scales. You could have predicted when it was coming. It was a psychological resistance that made us say, oh no, Go is special, oh no, chess is special, or whatever. So we're psychologically wrapped up in being very special, but the technological progress had actually been quite linear.
I'll have to look at what's said about Go. I mean, there is quite a lot of evidence that people looking at the previous Go best software, which is called Crazy Stone, I think, or something like that, when people who had looked at that said, well, it's still going to take 10 years or 20 years before it's better than the best. And there was a division. The people who were in the field of AI said it's going to take 10 years. The Go players themselves said it's going to take 20 years. And then it happened in just 2 years. But let me pass the microphone down. So feel free to comment on that or any other thing that's on the top, burning on your minds.
To Tony, congratulations on being comfortably retired. It's a good position to be in. And I just invite you to consider the fact that you are very definitely in the 1%. So, you know, you might want to think about inequality in that context. In fact, you're probably in the 0.01%, actually, globally. And I don't agree with you, Joanna, that we are already in the changes. We are at full employment. Some of the jobs are bullshit jobs, but we are at full employment. What I call the economic singularity, the technological unemployment big change will happen when we start to really lose lots of jobs, if and when we start to lose lots of jobs.
We already are in the situation where we could stop, and somebody already said this, right? We could already stop, only work 17 weeks a year and have the same standard of living that a century ago people enjoyed. The average, those are for average salaries, right? But nobody wants a century-old standard of living, right? But this is still a choice. But we only have to go a couple more decades like that, and it'll become even more of a choice, right? It's not about starving or whatever. They were borderline starving a century ago.
Anybody else want to comment on that? Why aren't we doing what John Maynard Keynes said we would do by this time, which is only work a few hours a day? Why do we need so much more?
Do you want to? Okay, yeah. I just wanted to say, yeah. I mean, I think that's partly because we haven't really recognized all the things we do, which are not counted as jobs right now, as work. Or maybe we don't need to count that as work. What we need to do is say, well, work is actually bad, and what I do with the rest. And what I really liked about both Calum's and other people's presentations was talking about how we really do want to live our lives is, you know, creatively and with each other, and, you know, hopefully, you know, developing the kinds of relationships that we want. One thing I wanted to, but also I think really at this point, I think really the best case for basic income, and I don't like the term either, actually, Calum. I think it's terrible, all right? I would actually, along with Guy, I would call it a social dividend, at least to start out with. And I, yes, certainly agree with the kind of forward projection of a life of a world with full abundance, all right? I guess what I worry about, okay, say you had the graph about people still buying things, but the actual material going down, is that in a book called The Bleeding Edge, they talk about how it's actually quite hidden from us in the West, all right, or in Europe and the States, that, you know, say a phone or a PC actually costs the earth an awful lot more than the actual thing that we buy. All right, say for a PC, for example, I mean, that's like basically a medium-sized living room's worth of actual stuff that's actually come out of the ground, and that people are actually fighting wars over right now. So I guess I just want to put that caveat into, I mean, I really like the vision that's been put forward today by most of the speakers. But I think, you know, we can kind of sit here and we don't, because we're kind of sheltered from these wars. I mean, I'm particularly thinking of places like Congo, Paraguay, and Mongolia, where the lithium and other rare earths are coming out, you know, in order to create the batteries. I think we really actually also have to think about how do we cut down on the actual amount of stuff that is necessary to create the technology that we depend on.
One of the things that particularly strikes me about this, and someone, it might have been you, Calum, that mentioned about the issue that we face, not a technological issue, it's a social issue. And maybe the issue around this is that we have a mindset that's been kind of almost predetermined, it's almost programmed into us. So the profit motive as to why it's really interesting and useful to develop new technologies. This kind of short-termism which we see in corporations, and we also see in governments as well, because after all, each electoral cycle, the incumbent government puts forward a marketing campaign in order to sell the propositions it has. Doesn't that sound like a business? And isn't it also like a business to actually look to communicate its sense of certainty about an uncertain future? So I think there's a kind of a mindset thing that needs to go on here, and maybe what we're seeing is the ability to change our lives quicker than we as humans find it comfortable to do, and maybe that's the essence of the challenge that we really face.
I think we have to distinguish between the basic and conditional income. I think basic is, as I mentioned, the right, and we all agree that this is the right, the ethics applied to what people should generally get. But longer term, we should put the emphasis on the conditional income as the way to bring us to the level where we can sustain our life and lead our life as we want and do what we want. The third point I would make is that in question of the rollout, it should really be out of the government hands. There are a number of other areas that people are talking about, like NHS and so on. We should have a much more technocratic approach to that, out of the hands of the politicians, so that we can ascertain that in question, in case of UBI, that we can afford UBI and that can be justly distributed among those who need it.
It is quite late. Let's how many people desperately want to ask a question here? Or how many people can wait for the pub or some informal discussion?
I just wanted to say on affordability, I think that those people who Guy so passionately described, who are depriving other people of their income arbitrarily, there's a whole load of people employed doing that, and if you don't have the assessments, you don't need all that work. That adds to affordability. Also, the people saying, why should the rich people get it? Well, the tax system will take it off the top, so don't worry too much about that. And it's a clean system, you know, just cutting out all that conditionality. And yes, of course, other people, there'll be work that other people, you know, that people can do who can and who want to. And I don't say much about myself, but I have been unemployed since my daughter was born. My employers were horrible to me. I was underemployed for my intelligence. They were giving me grief for the whole of 8 years that I was there. And when my daughter was born, I thought, I don't need this. I can stay home, I can feed my babies, and I can do work. And I've been doing a service industry, providing an information service. I cook at home. We don't run a car. I've still got clothes that I bought decades ago. Otherwise, I go to charity shops. I've got a low lifestyle. I'm just like Barbara was saying, and I'm ahead of the game.
Thank you. So the question of conditionality comes back, and Tony, you were saying we should have some conditionality in the system. There's a whole minor industry of people figuring out who deserves and who doesn't deserve. Can we get rid of it all? I don't think we can. I mean, all the UBI spokespeople I've heard have said that there should be some extra conditions still left. There will still be some housing benefit to be paid and so on. So, but anyway, let's discuss it. Let's figure out what's credible and what's not credible. Any closing comments? Barbara.
The one thing that I really found a bit odd was about the affordability that you talked about in Calum's thing. And I kind of wonder, like, if we're talking about like an abundant culture with stuff that's abundant, I kind of wonder how it is that money, which is something that people have invented, and that there's no kind of, you know, we can invent as much of it as we need if we have to. Okay, it's not like, you know, it's not like lithium, or it's not like rare earth metals or whatever. How you come to the idea that it's not affordable. Okay, so there's that. Let me just one more thing, and that's one thing I forgot to say in my speech, which was that I'm actually, I think that a lot of people used to, anyway, maybe not now, but they used to go into what used to be called the Department of Health and Social Services to do good, all right? And they wanted to help people, okay? And I think actually, you know, there's some evidence coming from Denmark, where there's a private pilot going on, and some from the US and Canada, and particularly Canada, where public service workers, whether they're social workers or whether they work administering welfare, saying, basic income is really great because I don't have to police people anymore. I can actually help them, which is what I wanted to do, all right? And my thing is not so much about reducing bureaucracy, and from the governmental standpoint, it's actually reducing bureaucracy from the people who need it, from poor people who actually who have to deal with it. And I think there's a lot of stuff that we're going to need to do. There's a lot of recovering that, you know, if we manage to get over this hump and actually have this abundant society, whether that's in money or stuff or both, hopefully, there's actually a lot of recovering we're going to have to do. There are a lot of damaged people out there, and there's a lot of help that we need to give. That's all.
Yeah, if I can just answer that. So I obviously didn't close the argument properly. So look at it a slightly different way. If we get to the point where there is widespread permanent unemployability, then there's going to have to be very significant transfers of income / wealth from those who have assets, those who have jobs, to those who don't. And coming into the room, the presumption is that universal basic income is the answer. I think it's not, because it's unaffordable and it's basic and it's also universal. But if we get to the economy of abundance, then the transfers of wealth and income become possible. That's my point.
Okay. I mean, I would see basic income. I would see basic income as a step to that, but anyway, that's another thing.
The transition is always the trickiest, how we get to this state. So I want to thank all of you for being great troopers. You've stayed all the way through. I hope you've got some new things to think about there. I hope you can also join the discussion online. We have a new Slack instance for London Futurists, giving up trying to hold the discussions on Meetup. Meetup is good for some things. It's not great for online discussions. So you can find out how to get on to the Slack. We will continue some of these discussions, if you want, by looking on the London Futurists site. If you still can't find how to get there, let me know, and I'll send you a link to join. You're also welcome to have real-world discussion now in the nearby pub, which I mentioned, and maybe with a little bit of basic alcohol or other basics. Maybe not so basics, it's up to you. We'll have another flourishing discussion. So thanks to the audience, and thanks to all the speakers and panelists. All the best.